Hi, welcome back to the channel. Michelle, and today I'm going to be talking about the books I've been reading the last couple weeks of February, and I've been doing a lot of reading. So I'm going to start with a book that I already had to return, and that is what we're doing for our church book club for the month of February, and it's called Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is a former bishop in the England church, and it was some parts I liked, some I didn't. And I think that's with most Christian books. He definitely leans conservative in certain areas, which is obvious in the books. But I did like his take on justice. I like how his reminder of how Martin Luther King used his religious beliefs in support of people who were facing injustice. I sometimes think Christians forget that what we're called to do and what Jesus preached and spoke about was helping those in need. And I think sometimes in the world we live in, at least the mainstream of Christianity being put out there, is the opposite, where it's using religion to harm others or to ostracize others. So I do like his section on justice. I thought it was really good that we're called in the image of God to promote justice for everybody, especially those who are at higher risk, not just who we think is worthy of being treated like a human being. I like that part. He does go kind of, not heavy, but repetitive. He gets repetitive through the book, and it's kind of boring. It's one of those, for 131 pages, it felt so much longer. It just felt like he kept going on, and it took him a while to get to the point. And then, of course, his views on sexuality towards the end of the book, I completely disagree with. He is not a supporter of LGBTQ plus community. He has some opinions about that I don't jive with. But I do think it's important to read books with different viewpoints. And for a lot of things I agree with, there will always be things I disagree with. But I wouldn't say it was an interesting read. It's not like I was excited to pick it up. I finished it for our book club, and I am excited for how other people interpret it and what they think of it, but it's not one I would recommend. So next, I've been reading a lot of romance novels, specifically Julia Quinn. And I'll link above the last what I've been reading video had the Bridgerton books. So I've read all of the 8 Bridgerton books. So I wanted to try different series that she's written, because she does have different series, some within the Bridgerton universe. So the next one I picked up was the Rokesby series. It's a prequel to Bridgerton, although it does, the last one I read does have Violet a little in it, and it does have Anthony, Benedict, and Colin as children in it. So that kind of tells you the time period. But this family is next door neighbors to the original Bridgertons, and it goes through their story, minus the oldest daughter, which is Mary, but it goes through the 3 boys' story. And then the Bridgerton line is, of course, in there as well. So the first one I'm going to talk about, I already returned to the library. So that one is Because of Miss Bridgerton, and this is about Billy Bridgerton, the oldest. So the Rokesbys and the Bridgertons are next door neighbors. So the oldest Bridgerton is Billy Bridgerton, and then she has brothers after that. And it's her story, and I really like Billy's character. Reminds me of Eloise, very strong, very independent, and she ends up being in a relationship with George, the oldest of the Rokesby family, and kind of their journey and stubbornness and all that. So I did enjoy that book, and it did remind me of Eloise from the Bridgerton series. And one of the things I find I like about the Julia Quinn books is she writes strong female characters. Even for this time period, they were going against the grain. And yes, are there romance and significant others in it? But that's the women's choice, not always given the situations, and it's talked about in the books, the limited choices of women, which I appreciate as well. But they choose often they choose relationships, and they marry for love and all these things. So I do think it's important to have strong female characters in this, not just marrying because that's what's expected, or marrying because you have no rights as a woman. I do like she writes strong female characters and men who aren't pigs, which I can appreciate, that aren't just interested in one thing, that have depth. So the next one I'm going to talk about which is next in the series, and this is The Girl with the Make-Believe Husband. And these books aren't long. This one is almost 300 pages. And this one goes over Cecilia Harcourt. This one I actually really enjoyed. This was kind of her perspective, and it goes into another Rokesby brother who would have been Edward, so the second in line, I believe. That's correct. George would have been first, and then it goes into Edward. And her story is that her brother, Andrew, goes to fight in the war. She gets a message that he's been injured and is at, a hospital. So her father dies, she's alone, and her cousin comes in and wants to take control because, again, women didn't have right to property and things like that at that point. So she decides to cross an ocean and go help her brother in the hospital, but when she gets there, she can't find her brother, but she finds his best friend, which is Edward, and she decides to nurse him because Edward is also severely injured. So she nurses him back to health, but the only reason she could get the officers to let her work in the hospital to help him is by saying she was married to him, because it was only family that could see at that time. So she lied and said she was married to him while she was tending to him and taking care of him. Well, eventually he wakes up from his coma and has memory loss. So he thinks he forgot he got married, and she kind of plays along because she realizes the only reason she can get information about her brother is by pretending to still be married, because he comes from an influential family and they're more likely to get answers. So she kind of uses that excuse. So he thinks they're married. She knows they're not married and continues to lie to him. And it's the progression of the story. But I think it was really good and I really enjoyed the ending. Next in the line is the other Miss Bridgerton. Again, these are the old copies from the library. And this one is about Poppy Bridgerton, and the next son in line for the Rokesbys is Andrew. And this one I actually really liked. I think it was a little different than others. And it's so cliche because it's like, pirates and overseas and all this like typical cliche romance novel stuff. But I think it was done really well. So Andrew gets a secret mission. He becomes a privateer. Poppy accidentally stumbles upon a cave where they're keeping certain supplies, so they have to take her with them during the voyage, and she's kind of held captive, and she doesn't realize that Andrew is Andrew knows who the Bridgertons are, knows who she is, but she doesn't know who he is because he doesn't say that he is actual, because he has this secret mission, he doesn't reveal his complete identity. So kind of their relationship building up to that. And then at the end, I was really surprised because it had a lot more action in it, not the type of action you're thinking. Again, the Julia Quinn books usually have maybe 1-2 romance scenes, nothing overly done, very tasteful in my opinion. But they get kidnapped, both of them, and end up getting kidnapped. And you're not sure what's going to happen. There's some violence that happens, but it was interesting. I really liked it. It picked it up a pace from the other books. And then the last one is First Comes Scandal. And this one is about Georgina, or Georgie. So she's on the Bridgerton side, and her relationship with Nicholas. So this one was really interesting because the story starts out with her reputation being ruined. So Georgina, or Georgie, was out at a bookstore, and this guy pretty much kidnapped her, shoved her in the carriage, took off, and because of the rules of the time, if you were alone with a man, you were considered ruined. So she has the option of either marrying the man who kidnapped her or being a spinster. So the Rokesbys, because they're such good friends with the Bridgerton, come up with the idea that, okay, well, you can marry the youngest Rokesby, and that will save your reputation, and you won't have to be alone. So there's the duality of that. Nicholas is called back from school, says he has to marry this girl, and he doesn't want to, and she doesn't want to, and it kind of goes and builds upon that relationship. And what I really like about this one is Nicholas is a doctor in it, and Georgie shows interest in that field, and it talks about how women aren't allowed to study that field, aren't allowed to be doctors. And really, again, it goes into that strong, independent female character. And I also appreciate how they talk about how it's difficult being the spouse of someone who works in a vocation like that their spouse is often gone or often called away unexpectedly, and the difficulties of that. So I appreciate that part. But again, I thought it was a good story. So those are the most recent Bridgerton books I'm reading. I do plan on starting another series after that as well. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Maybe He Just Likes You by Barbara Dee. So I've been pre-reading books for next year in 8th grade for my oldest. She's 12 years old. different topics I want to cover with her, and this one is a good book, but it's difficult to read. It can be very triggering, I think, as a female. It's about a 12-year-old girl in 7th grade, and some boys start harassing her. They created this scorecard game where if they touch her a certain way, they get points. If they say things to her, they get points, and it becomes a game in the middle school. And no one really believes her that these things are happening. The teachers kind of blow it off. The principal, who happens to also be the coach for the boys' basketball team, which is the main kids causing the sexual harassment, kind of blows it off. So there's that power dynamic there, which I think really speaks to our society as well. And even her friends kind of blow her off, that one of her friends thinks she's doing it for attention and things like that, which I think is very reminiscent of middle school girls and girls in general, honestly, thinking the worst of the female instead of realizing the guy you like is just a jerk. So I think it's got a lot about relationships, both friendships and personal relationships. Her mom's going through a difficult time at the same time. She's a single parent, so she doesn't really want to worry her mom about all these things are going on at school. So it has so many different layers that I think are really important. But as a woman, it's difficult to read because I want to punch some of the characters in the face because it's not okay. And one of the scenes, they kind of trap her on a bus and won't let her get up when the bus stops for her. And in order to get up, she has to push against them, which is what they want because they want to grab pieces of her. So that there are triggering moments that are difficult to read in that. And again, 12-year-old girl, my daughter's about to be 12, so it just makes me really angry at the world and how the positions women are put in and how we have to defend ourselves to the simplest things, but often have to be polite just to get out of certain situations and play along for our own safety is messed up. And especially what's going on with girls in this country, women in this country, how rights are being stripped, how we seem to be going backwards in a lot of that. It's hard to read that, but I think it's gonna be really important for my daughter and I to go through this and discuss it. So, the last one I read, my first nonfiction book I picked up in a really long time, and this is The Sirens Call by Chris Hayes, How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource. Chris Hayes has his own show, I believe, on MSNBC. I saw this at the library, picked it up. I did enjoy it. I do think it has I think the premise of the book is smart, that the sirens call it, right? That you get tied to the mast of the ship. So when you hear the sirens call, it leads to your ultimate death. That's what he's talking about in the book, that we know the sirens call is bad for us. We know what's going to happen, but we still listen to it, and it leads to our demise. So I did enjoy the book. I think, again, it takes a while to get to the point. I like his humor in it. I thought that was really funny. Obviously, he leans a certain way in this. He makes fun of Trump. He makes fun of Musk in here. But he also brings up, corporations and makes you think. I mean, I have a marketing background. That's what I got a degree in. So what he's talking about in here isn't shocking for me. And also how technology just grabs our attention, how it's, he ties in psychology and cites his resources, which is really important. Ties in psychology, he ties in history, looking at the Industrial Revolution, factories, all these. He ties all these little parts together, which I think weaves a really good tapestry of his bigger picture of what's happening to society. So I did enjoy the book and I would recommend it if that's something you're looking into. But that is everything I've read the last couple of weeks of February. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, I thank you for watching.